Hi, I'm Dr. J. I make a life out of walking with leaders in many different roles, in contexts in the church, in ministry, in business, in government, in the military. I get to wear a lot of different hats, but the only thing they all have in common is that I get to walk with leaders, helping them be more successful or helping them build strong teams. So I want to share a little bit of what I've learned in doing that with you today in a session called The Doing Dilemma. The Doing Dilemma. I want to help you change your perspective in a powerful way that helps you empower and lift up your team members. You know, leadership has a strange way of making us self-centered. Not necessarily selfish, but self-centered. I don't really know why. I think it's some sort of combination of, all the responsibilities and the decisions and knowing that everything rests on what you do that can kind of shrink your world to where you wear that sort of responsibility and you start looking at everything through the lens of yourself and what you need to do or what your responsibility is. And, that can often make you a really responsible leader, but can also shrink your world to where you're less aware of the people you lead. And I want to talk to you today about shifting that perspective so that you're really focused on the people that you lead. In fact, you're invested in them even more than in the outcome you're trying to achieve. Sound provocative? Well, I hope so. I only have enough time with you really to kind of stir you up and share what I hope are some provocative ideas, and then we'll have a little time together for questions and answers after this. But I want to talk about this doing dilemma. It's about this change in perspective. Now, if you're a leader now, there's a good chance that at some point or another, you were a consummate doer. You were really good at getting things done. You had mad technical skills. You could do whatever it took. And in fact, it was that ability to be a great doer that distinguished you and probably gave you the opportunity to step up into a leadership role. But now that you're in your leadership position, you might find that some of those very same skills and dispositions that distinguished you as a doer don't serve you as well now that you're a leader. In fact, you might even find that some of those very same sort of go-to attributes, go-to habits, are sort of liabilities in leadership when you're trying to raise up a strong team. Well, I can explain why that happens. That's because doers and leaders are different in a variety of ways, but most importantly, they have a very different perspective on power and how to use it. And if you want to be a great leader, you have to change your perspective. And nobody warns you about this. Nobody tells you that that's going to be required. So when you step up into leadership, often you give yourself to it with all the enthusiasm and all the initiative that you did as a doer without the same results. Let me explain this difference in perspective, and encourage you to adopt it because, well, let's first look at what makes a great doer. I'm going to use some really highly technical drawings here. You can sketch them there for yourself if you'd like, but here's our great doer. Yeah, I know it's a man in this case, but that's just because my clip art was limited. Those of you listening to this that are women, of course, this could be a woman as well. And you see the mountain here with the flag on it. That represents the outcome to be achieved. This is the mountain to be climbed, the project to be completed. And a doer is defined by their laser focus on that outcome. Right? I mean, they really keep their eye on the prize. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get to the summit and plant the flag. That's what makes a great doer. And you know this, right? I mean, this is probably many of you, right? You've already distinguished yourself because you have this same sort of unencumbered laser focus on the goal. Well, that's great for a doer, but this isn't the diagram of a great leader, because when it comes to being a great leader, there's actually another element in this system. It's not just you and the outcome, it's these people. That's right, it's your team. And if you continue to think like a leader and continue to have this laser focus on the outcome, it's not long before these people can feel like unnecessary complications or sort of impediments between you and getting the job done. That's because when you're a leader, you have to adjust your focus. Instead of focusing on the outcome, you have to focus on the team. These people are the job. That's because doers are known by their direct impact on outcomes. What I mean by that is they grab a hold of the outcome themselves. They roll their sleeves up and get a grip on it. That's what they achieve. But leaders are known by their indirect impact on outcomes. What I mean by that is, as a leader, if everything goes well, when the smoke clears, the outcome is going to have your team's fingerprints all over it. But your mark is going to be on the team, on the people. Have you ever thought about it that way? I talk to lots of leaders, and they kind of back into this because they try to approach leadership like they did as doers. And they keep running into trouble because they're sort of looking past or through or around their team rather than recognizing that the people are the job. But it's difficult because when you're a leader, this means you have to really do some very different things, prioritize some different activities than you did as a doer. Because when you were a doer and you wanted to do things yourself, that was what defined you. Well, you take control, right? You amass knowledge, you exert your influence, you take more responsibility. And when things get tough, you turn up your own level of commitment, right? Your own level of engagement. You find that extra gear and do whatever it takes. But consider this, when you're a leader and you don't have that direct impact on outcomes, well, now to pour into your team, you have to give control away, give it to other people. You have to share knowledge. You have to offer influence to other people and actually assign responsibility. And when things get really tough, you have to elevate other people's level of engagement and performance, not your own. Well, think about that. If you don't realize that this is a switch, if you don't adjust this and you continue to do the things that you excelled at and felt good as a doer, you might find yourself actually disempowering your team. Sometimes you find yourself doing some strange things trying to think about this. I realized there was a moment for me like this that I kind of remember. I was the chief student affairs officer at a university. I was associate provost and dean of students. And we were going to give a big report to the board of trustees and all the senior leaders of the university. It was a big deal. We'd been preparing it for a couple weeks. And on the afternoon, before we were to give this report, we discovered a problem, an error in the report. It wasn't just any error. It was the kind of error that, like, once you discover it, you almost wish you didn't find it until it was too late, right? Because this was a big deal. It was a flaw in the underlying assumptions that we had been planning on, and it was going to require us to redo the whole thing. And remember, this is the afternoon before we were to be giving the report. So I just heaved a sigh and thought, oh man, this is going to take a lot. I rolled up my sleeves and I reached for the phone. I was going to call my wife and tell her, look, I'm not going to be home tonight. This is going to take so much work. And the team lead, the young woman in charge of the team that was working on this, came into my office. She said, Dr. J, we got it. We're working on it. Look, we've already talked to everybody. They're going to come in. We're going to spend all night. We're going to just start over and we're going to redo the report. And she looked me in the eye and she said, we got this. And I said, well, okay. And she left the office. The rest of the afternoon went by. And then I came to this sort of gut check moment. It was the end of the workday, and I had to decide, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go out and get busy and dive into working on this with everybody else, or am I going to go home? I was really debating this. I was trying to decide, what is it? Am I a doer? What would they do? Am I a leader? What would they do? And in the end, I decided to go home. And so I walked out to the car. As so many of my staff members were coming in and settling in for the night, I walked out to the car, and I got to tell you, it was a painful walk. I mean, every step of the way, my inner doer was rising up and telling me, no, you got to go in there, grab a hold, get in, get busy. And I walked on out. And I'd like to tell you that I did this because, I understand the difference between doers and leaders. I can draw these diagrams and talk to you about this and all, but the truth is, even if that was going on in my head, maybe more importantly was when that team lead looked me in the eye and she said, we got this. There was also something in her eye that sort of said, and we don't need you all here up in our business. And so I thought, okay, I'll go home. Now, here's my question for you. I wish I could hear your responses at the moment, but what do you think about that? I mean, was that a good move? Was that a good leadership move? Well, I can almost hear some of you saying, "No, no, that's not a good move," or maybe you're saying, "Dr. J, aren't leaders supposed to model what's expected? Like, isn't it up to the leader to show everyone what it looks like to be committed and to be all in?" Well, I'd agree with you. I'd say, yeah, it is up to a leader to model that. But here's the rub: how you model being committed or being all in as a leader is different than how you do as a doer. Does that make sense? Is look, think of it this way: if I'm in there and I'm getting a hold of things, if I'm getting busy, I'm actually taking up the space for my people. They're not going to be able to do that. Like you know that feeling, right? In your life, there's probably been some point when you were a doer that there was a big crisis, right? Somebody had to step up. Somebody had to be the one to stay late, work long, do whatever it took, and it was you. And at the time, I bet it was really difficult. I mean, I bet it took a lot out of you, but over time, I bet that's become sort of a badge of honor for you. Maybe sort of something that's hanging in your sort of personal hall of fame, because even though it was really hard, it felt good to be the one that had what it took, and the one that was willing to go that extra mile, right? Well, let me suggest to you that these days, those moments still exist. They come up all the time, but now that you're a leader, they're no longer your moments. Those are for somebody on your team. And if you're not careful, you'll dive in and you'll steal those moments and you'll disempower them because you're trying still to be the doer that grabs hold and has direct influence on outcomes. Now, I guess I should be more honest than this. I left at the end of the workday, but honestly, I didn't stay gone. I came back. I think it was like maybe midnight or a little bit afterwards. And I came back carrying the largest stack of pizzas that I could balance. I got there and I went in and I started handing out pizzas to everybody. I giving them slices and patting them on the back, encouraging them. It was all I could do not to kind of start getting involved myself and helping them with things. But I tried to resist that. I tried to stand back and give them the space to do that. And after a little while, I went home again. Right? Sometimes if you want your team to step up and take care of business, well, the best thing you can do is to step back and take care of them. Because remember, as a leader, your fingerprints aren't the ones on the outcome. Your mark is on the team. So you got to make space, step back, and empower them. After my little pizza foray, I went home and I slept the rest of the night. I came in the next morning. Man, the place looked like a war zone. Pizza boxes everywhere, people draped on the furniture. And I mean, you could tell that it had been a long night. People were really tired. But if you looked a little closer, you could see they were sort of standing tall, too. I mean, they were fatigued, but they felt good. I mean, this was what an empowered team looked like. They'd pulled it off, and they did a great job. Well, I try to hold on to this. I try to remember this example so that I remember to act like a leader when I'm leading. Now, I know your job isn't that simple. I make it sound like you're either doing or you're leading, and I know it's more complicated than that. Your job has a little bit of both in it, right? You wear both hats. You're probably often more like a player coach where you're in the midst of things, and I get that. But the reason I talk about it like this is that I've discovered that leaders who don't at least conceive of or conceptualize these roles as very different quickly wind up frustrating or disempowering their team members. They keep getting in the way. They keep doing the things that felt really good to them as a doer or give them a sense of grabbing hold of the outcome and making a difference, when in reality they need to step back and prepare the people and the processes that should be doing that. Let me give you some idea of what you might see if you don't make this shift, if you don't change this perspective. In other words, these are some dangers of doing when really you should be leading. If you're still exhibiting these sort of doer tendencies, you haven't made the shift in perspective, well, you quickly become a limiter, and your organization and its impact never get bigger than you are. You're still holding on to too many things, and it can't grow beyond that. Or you might find that you're just swamped with the number of things that you have to handle, the number of things that you feel like require your personal attention. And so you wear out or you burn out. Or maybe as those things start becoming dangerous, start threatening you, you just simply diminish the aspirations so that you don't. You just decide, I just can't handle anymore. And so the only way you can survive is to pull the bar down and not aim for as much because, well, you're still trying to handle and touch too many things yourself. The other thing that sometimes happens if you're trying to be a doer when you really should be a leader is you might find that, some of your greatest achievements, the thing that you and your organization are proudest of, don't pass what I call the hit by a bus test. I know it's a strange name and maybe it's a little morbid, but what I mean by that is if you got hit by a bus, would the things that are most important or most appreciated in your organization continue? If not, then you're too significant. You're touching too many things. You're too integral, and your team hasn't been raised up to a point where it's more essential. So you want it to pass the hit by a bus test. That means you need to think a little more like a leader and step away from the outcome a little farther. Another danger of doing when you should be leading is that you might find that things in your organization or your team move only when you do. And you've kind of created an organization of helpers rather than real owners and leaders. Great leaders have a way of raising up other leaders, and that has to do with the fact that they step back from the outcome and invest in other people so those people feel a sense of ownership rather than just sort of helping the leader out. Sometimes I see leaders that haven't made this shift, and it's like they're trying to run their organization like a PTO bake sale. Have you ever been part of one of those things? Usually a PTO bake sale is one of those things where one poor soul, one mom gets drafted to be in charge of the bake sale this year, and then other people come along and might help them out. But really, it's all about that one person pulling this off with a few people to help them. And, well, frankly, that's not such a bad model for pulling off a bake sale. But if you've got a much bigger aspiration or a bigger organization, you can't afford to try to pull it off with helpers. No, you need co-owners of the mission, co-owners of the tasks. And that means that you've got to step back from it a little yourself and give them room to step up. And finally, this is maybe a scarier situation, is if you've been a leader for a while, but you've been approaching it more like a doer, you might turn around after a bunch of time has passed and you might find that you've accomplished a lot, you've checked a lot of things off, but you haven't really built anything. You haven't made something separate from you, something that is strong or can achieve these things. Like it all revolves around this shift in perspective to recognize that when you step into leadership, you got to let go of the outcome. And I know you can't stop thinking about it or caring about it. Of course, you've got it in your mind, but it's just that if you have to adjust the outcome, if you have to improve it, you can't grab it directly. You have to turn to one of your people. Turn to one of your processes, figure out how you're going to indirectly improve the outcome. Often I think the thing that kind of holds leaders back from making this shift, and maybe you're thinking about this right now, is that involves a lot of risk, right? And again, I don't know that anybody talks about this. When we talk about being able to step up into leadership, I don't know that anybody warns you that it's a risky proposition because, look, when you were a doer, you might have had to do a lot, might have been strenuous, and you had a lot on your plate. But at least you were responsible for your own reputation, your own destiny. You were a master of your own future, right? But when you step up into leadership, the way I'm describing this shift in perspective, well, you have to grapple with the fact that your destiny, your reputation is no longer your own. Now your rep rises or falls on what other people do or don't do. Right? Your success in your future isn't about just what you do. It's about what your team does and the people that you lead do. Well, that's a pretty vulnerable position to be in. As a result, I see leaders frequently they protect themselves by kind of hedging their bets, right? They're really careful about the choices they give people and how much latitude they give their team or how much influence and opportunity to affect things they give people. they would never give an important task to somebody that they didn't already expect would just knock a home run, right? And I get it. There's a sort of logic in that, but it's also a dangerous move because expectations are powerful things, right? In fact, if you aren't careful, your expectations can set in motion something that we call the self-fulfilling prophecy. Have you ever heard that term before? The self-fulfilling prophecy refers to a phenomenon where your expectations or what you anticipate actually conspire to bring about the very thing that you are expecting. It's sometimes you've heard the saying that seeing is believing. Well, the self-fulfilling prophecy reminds us that no, really, believing is seeing because it's your expectations that end up shaping reality in powerful ways. I'll give you an example. This is kind of an apocryphal story, but I found that it's kind of sticky, and it'll help you remember this point. When my wife was graduating from grad school, a woman ahead of her, there was a story about a woman ahead of her that had gone into teaching. And so she heard this story, and this woman graduated, and because she was a brand new teacher stepping into the school, she was assigned that class. Do you know what I mean by that class? If you're a teacher or you know a teacher, you might know what that means to say that class, because that class is always, it's the one nobody wants. It's the one that's lagging behind in their achievements, and maybe they're having behavioral problems, but no teacher wants it. In fact, I'm convinced some teachers even manage their maternity leave to make sure that it happens and they don't have to have that class, okay? But because this young woman was a new teacher, she was a low person on the totem pole, and she was assigned that class. As she stepped into the school year, she kind of rolled up her sleeves and said, all right, I'm going to get to work on this. And, after a month or so in, it did look like something different was going on. By the time they got to the middle of the fall semester, it seemed like a number of the behavioral problems had stopped. When they got into the sort of Christmas break, everybody was sure something was going on now. Some new wind was blowing. When they got into the early spring semester, it was pretty obvious that things were improving. Students were buckling down on their grades. And by the time they got to the end of the school year, it was just amazing. The class was now a good class. It had caught up all the ground that it had been lacking. I mean, it was an amazing turnaround. So at the end of the year, the principal called the teacher into his office and said, how did you do this? This is spectacular. She kind of just rolled her eyes and said, well, it wasn't any big deal. I mean, I knew they could do the work. And he said, well, how were you so confident that they could do the work? She said, well, once I saw their IQ scores, I knew they were capable. And he said, well, where did you see their IQ scores? And she said, well, in their file. And he said, well, show me. So they went over to the filing cabinet and kind of flipped through the folders for just a minute, and she pulled one out and pointed at a number. And the principal glanced at it and then looked at her kind of baffled and said, that's not their IQ score, that's their locker number. So what was going on here? I mean, do you think that their locker numbers were sort of magically correlated with their IQ? I kind of doubt it. Right? It was the teacher's expectations, right? She expected they could do it, and they did it. Now, wait, I know that sounds kind of crazy. That's like I'm saying that the self-fulfilling prophecy refers to the fact that if we imagine something, our thoughts make it happen in reality, and that's not really accurate. Maybe it's more accurate to say our thoughts and our expectations profoundly change our behavior, and our behavior has a big effect on reality. Does that make sense? Now, that's why I'm talking about this, because if you're really going to step back and put your team forward, if you're going to make this shift from doer to leader, then it comes with some real risks. And if you hedge your bets or kind of deal with that risk by kind of being really careful and only following your best expectations, in other words, only letting people do things that you expect will do great with them, you could find yourself setting into motion this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way that could really hurt you and your team. It could cause real problems because, look, people have an annoying tendency to step up to your high expectations or fall back to your low ones. And that means that your low expectations can set in motion something that's called the setup to fail syndrome. The setup to fail syndrome. And in this case, you might wind up turning some of your best performers into bad ones. Let me give you an example of what the setup to fail syndrome would look like if all of us were in a group, okay, and I'm the leader of the group or the team. I might be looking out there and I'd see over there's Bob, and I've been noticing that Bob has been kind of disengaged in our team meetings, and after a while, I've been thinking about it, and I'm beginning to suspect that Bob is a slacker, that he's not committed, right? I've been just watching his behavior. That's what I've decided. And so I've been kind of keeping an eye on him. Now, if that's my expectation, what are the chances of me giving something really important to Bob? I mean, when there's a really meaty project, something that we've got a lot riding on, when that comes up, what are the chances of me delegating it to Bob? Pretty slim, right? Right? Because I expect that he would do poorly on that because he's disengaged. He's a slacker, right? All right, so what if we kind of could look at this from a different direction, and we found out that the truth of this is that Bob is sort of acting a little disengaged. But it's not because he's a slacker. It's because he's been part of our team now for some time, and he's really getting frustrated and discouraged because he doesn't really know what his role is. He's not getting to do a lot of things. In fact, it seems to him that whenever anything important comes up, it goes to somebody else, not him. And it's starting to really affect his level of engagement and commitment. All right, now track with me here. If that's the case, then when some opportunity to do something really big comes up, and I as the leader don't assign it to Bob, what does that do to Bob's level of engagement? Right, Bob gets less engaged. Okay, so everything so far makes complete sense, right? But now, take note of this. When I as a leader notice that Bob gets even less engaged, what do I think? Yeah, right. I see that and I say, I was right all along. He is a slacker. Now, do you see what's happening here? It's starting to create a vicious cycle here because it's not like I'm responding to a situation. I'm actually creating this situation. This is what's so hard about the self-fulfilling prophecy and the setup to fail syndrome is that it's invisible to us. As a leader, I look at that and everything I see seems to confirm exactly what I thought all along. And so I continue to do what I've been doing. I just double down and I say, yep, he's a slacker. Let's give him even less. Bob takes note of that and gets even less engaged. And we just see the system begin to fall apart. That's why it's called the setup to fail syndrome, because I'm setting Bob up to fail. Now, here's where I'm going with this. If you want to make this shift, if you want to grapple with this doing a dilemma and you want to shift your perspective to where you're going to step back, you're not going to grab on directly to the outcome. Instead, you're going to invest in your team. Well, that means you have to embrace this idea of risk. And part of that risk is that you're going to have to risk more on all your people. You're going to have to keep your expectations high for everyone. You're going to give everybody a shot. And that means sometimes you're going to give people a chance to do things that you're not entirely sure they can do perfectly. That's scary, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying be foolish. I'm not saying give somebody a task and then just sort of cross your fingers and hope it goes great, okay? No, you can check in with them, progress reports, or you might have them kind of do a dress rehearsal with you before they give the report or something like that. That you can do some wise things like that, but here's where I'm going with this. If you don't want the setup to fail syndrome to start, if you don't want to fall prey to the negative effects of the self-fulfilling prophecy, well, then you've got to keep your expectations high for everyone. In fact, sometimes I put it this way, as if you would commit yourself to identifying failures more quickly and fixing them when you see them, rather than to avoiding them altogether in the first place. You might find yourself taking some risks that cause your people to step up rather than to fall back. I'll say that again. Put more of your time and energy into identifying potential failures and fixing them quickly, rather than to avoiding them entirely in the first place. That might lead you to take some appropriate risks and empower your team even more. All right, well, my time's about up, and I want to save enough time for us to actually talk about this a little. I want to be able to answer your questions or apply it to some of the situations you have. So let me just wrap it up by saying this. Look, the doing dilemma is all about making the shift from thinking like a doer to thinking like a leader, changing your perspective so that you know that those things that you were as a doer that caused you to personally grab a hold of things, amass your own ability, exercise your influence, and have a direct impact on outcomes need to be replaced when you're a leader, or they'll get you in trouble. They'll cause you to disempower or frustrate your team. And now you have to know that you have an indirect impact on outcomes. You affect the outcomes only by affecting your team members. And in so doing, you have to accept this level of risk. You have to step up to that sort of vulnerability as a leader. And if you kind of embrace these things, if you can really grapple with this doing dilemma, I think you'll find that you're far more effective as a leader. And as you step back, your people step up. You'll be really effective at encouraging and equipping them and causing them to elevate themselves to higher things. I hope that I can be of help to you in the future. If I can, please reach out and contact me. Otherwise, I'll look forward to talking to you here in just a moment live in the Q&A.